Welcome to the most exciting part of the day. This is where we get to berate the people who think they really are CTOs. Everyone else, we're like doctors. We're just practicing. These guys and girls, I think they're actually doing the real thing. So let's go. Here's how this is going to work. This is called the revolving limited fishbowl format for a discussion. The three people on stage will be discussing the topic that we have. They'll be discussing the topic. There is a fourth seat here. It is always empty. We have on the ground here another 5 or 6 people who will at some point decide that they have something to say on this topic, and they will stand up, they will come to the stage, and they will occupy the fourth chair. When that happens, one of the 3 in the chair here will self-select. Great to see how this all works. And will go down from the stage and go back onto the floor. All right? You can only speak while you're up here. And I have some topics. I've spoken to a bunch of people. We've gathered some information. I've headed them up that, there's going to be a little bit of stuff that they may have heard of and may not have heard of. So let's get this kicked off. Is everyone clear on the rules? All right, cool. All right. So first topic for discussion is the CTO is often a influencer role. Not many direct reports. Sometimes have or sometimes don't have, but has to get stuff done across the organization using their influence. So the question is, what do you do as a CTO? And this is good for budding engineers, people who want to move up the ranks and becoming a CTO. How do you go from being an individual contributor to someone who affects change across an organization using your influence skills? What are those things that you guys use around influence?
I got a microphone. Is this on? It's on. I got a couple of pro tips for technical people. Often, I think, make a mistake. You tell me what you think, Tom. That they think if they want to influence someone, they have to. It's about persuasion. Like the other person doesn't understand something, so they've got to convince them with an argument. I think it's much more about understanding the other person's point of view and being able to empathize with what they're trying to do and demonstrate that you're supportive of what they're trying to do, rather than trying to persuade them to be supportive of you.
You are being too nice.
Okay, well then,
because
it's all about control. Is that the right answer?
No, but you are trying to convince them. It's just that the mechanism that you're using to try and convince them is to get them to be on board with your vision, as opposed to being a top-down control model. I mean, you're still trying to convince them. At heart, that's what persuasion's all about and influence is all about. You are trying to convince them into your point of view.
I think the key, so if you can get to an outcome.
I disagree.
Maybe.
Controversial.
I think if you can get to an outcome where it's actually, if you can phrase it or position it or approach it in a way where it's a clear win-win, like I think that's the best. That's the best kind of easiest, which I think is what you were getting at, which is what does the business need? What does technology need? What do we need together? That's kind of, I think, the default. And then we can talk about a whole bunch of Jedi mind tricks, I think, that kind of maybe help nudge the discussion. But
I think where I disagree with a lot of people in practice, if not on the stage, Nicola, is that has anyone ever accused anyone else in their heart of resisting change?
All the time.
Yes. Well, in another unoriginal thought, Eli Goldratt, the inventor of theory of constraints, used to say, people don't resist change, they judge it. Right? So if you ever find yourself saying, those people, they're just resisting change, instead think about why they might be judging your idea to be not so good. And if you actually ask them, they'll probably give you some good ideas about why your stuff won't work. So if people are given the opportunity to tell you why they think your idea is dumb, it might actually teach you something.
But that produces oppositional thinking. So here's something that I learned from therapy. Therapy is awesome, you should all go. And part of this I actually apply on my children. A lot of management theory I have, particularly when you're talking about bringing people along on your path, is all about dealing with your children of various ages. Some in the workplace are a bit older than others. And so there's this thing called reactance theory. So if you sit there and say to someone, don't think about pink elephants, They think about pink elephants. And if you say my idea is the best idea ever, the first thing they're going to turn around and do is think of all the reasons why it's not the best idea ever. And this is actually evolution in action. It is part of what has kept us alive. When you see something, the first thing your mind does is, like, should I do this? What are the pros and cons? And we tend to focus on the cons more than the pros because the cons tend to be the things that might kill us. Do not go and pat the tiger. It looks fluffy and lovely, but you might lose a hand and that'd be bad. So, reactance theory says when you're coming along and you've got an idea to present to someone and you think that they're going to resist this idea for whatever reason, and you know your teams, you know the kinds of things that they're going to be unhappy about, instead of sitting there and presenting, here's my solution, tell me all the ways in which it's wrong, you can go along and say, here is the goal we are trying to solve. How do we solve this together? And then you're not attempting to convince them of things. You are guiding them on the way, and hopefully you can shepherd them to hit the where you're aiming for. Because if you sit there and say, "Here is my solution fully formed," then they're going to sit there and resist it.
So that's maybe a good segue. I'm sure we've all got our own personal top influencing tips. Like, what are the top influencing tips from the panel?
So, what I found myself doing is looking onto the dark side of an organisation, the sales team, and taking some tips from them. So I found myself reading books like How to Win Friends and Influence People. I did make a few more friends. I don't know if I influenced any more people, but taking some of the tips from the sales team, which traditionally engineers like to think, I've told someone something once and that's all I have to do. I've said it once, it's a fact, everyone get on board. That's not how it works. You've got to say, and I think we heard that this morning, you've got to say things over and over and over again, and then when you think you've said it enough, just say it once more. And so using those techniques and actually reading all the books about influence and sales, etc., that's what helped me sort of see that it's not a logical world. It's a touchy-feely, personal world that you're dealing with, and if you want to influence people, you've got to jump into that mindset.
This is my first gig as a CTO, and one of the best advice I received was to go in and not straight away think of making a change. Instead, think about, listen to people over there, listen to their problems, listen to what's going on, understand the whole scenario, and then probably propose some solutions which you can. And that has worked for me. I would like to think that my team and everyone thinks they listen to me, even though I might be youngest of all. But they listen to me as a leader, and I kind of have influenced them, but after I listened to what they wanted to say. So, yeah.
I think maybe my tip is around relationships. I think like influencing fundamentally comes down to your relationships. And I think, I was looking in the room, and myself included, I think we're, in the technology community, we're pretty guilty of not being great. I think relationship building and kind of the softer side of stuff, we're good with the ones and zeros. So really but you don't have to be a sales guy. I think if you approach it and, in an authentic way, like that's not going to work for you anyway. So I think about ways that, think about your relationships, how you build relationships in ways that work for you, whether that's one-on-one and in teams. And think about people in your organisation in terms of how you spend your time, particularly if it's a large organisation, where the leverage points are.
Tom, so you guys have been talking so far about influencing individuals, and we want to hear a bit more about influencing a company. What if the CEO comes to you and says, we want you to transform the company in this way? How do you wield influence at that kind of 1,000-person level?
I look at the sales team's friends in marketing and use some of their tricks.
My role, I actually sit at the exec table. So when we're making decisions about big decisions, whether they be about the sales team or technology, like I think being part of that team is one key way I do it. I think then the challenge is how does that translate then to a kind of execution, because we've got 650 people at REA in technology, and I can't speak to every one of them individually. So I really focus, and where I spend my time the most is focused on the people that can then be amplifiers of the message. So they're generally the leaders in the organisation, whether they're stated leaders in terms of the roles they've got, or whether they're kind of leaders on the ground because of people that naturally others gravitate to for direction.
So I think one of the best tools of influence that I've used on massive scale was borrowing from other people's credibility. So bringing someone from a company that, for example, was really well known for being successful in a particular way, and bringing them over for a learning lunch or a brown bag, whatever you call it, and having them with their credibility change the conversation within the organization. And because there's nothing like success to change how people think and bring out different practices.
Yeah, there's a skill as well in using consultants. Like when you know the answer but you're not being heard, pay someone else to bring in the answer. Yeah.
So the marketing element is very true. How do you leverage your own people that are influencers to help influence on your behalf? So having champions of particular causes is really, really helpful. So it's very, very true, especially if you're trying to embed a change in practices or train up, bring up a capability. Lifting up the capability on a temporary scale, like putting everyone through training on its own, that's not going to be enough. You need really that long tail of reinforcement and having those people that would champion it for you, because whether or not you have reports, you're never going to have the time to be at every conversation and at every decision point. So how are you going to leverage others and scale yourself?
I don't have like thousands of people to influence in our team. We run really lean, but you do need to influence. I think even a smaller team still has a lot of the similar principles you got to apply, and we've heard them here before. I think repetition's key. When React came out as a JavaScript framework, and it was really early days, and everyone was singing about Angular, and I was like, I think I like this React one. I just spoke about it so much. I got people in the team engaged about it. I think at some stage they had a counter about how many times I said the word in the day, and I think it wasn't just the repetition about it. It just showed that I was really interested in this, and if you wanted to get to work with me more closely or you wanted to step up as a leader, you had this opportunity to do so. So people did a little proof of concept and showed me, and then they get to work up and they get to work with more leaders in the business, and it's an opportunity for people to actually progress into leadership roles by picking to lead something. And I think that helps progress the change. You've got your amplifiers, you've got your other leaders, and then you're also opening up spots for new leaders to come in and steer the ship with you on this new opportunity.
So one more tool is hiring. So if you have the budget and you have the ability, you can hire people that share the same view as you. And that could be dangerous because that could also create a bit of a groupthink. So make sure you also hire for some diversity of thinking. But it's one element, one way of changing conversation.
All right, okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next topic. And I'd like to also ask the audience, if you have a question, raise your hand, I'll come over and we can, I'll see if I can inject it into the conversation for you. Okay, our next topic is ethics. So organizations can behave well, and they've got many opportunities to behave not so well. And sometimes that falls on the tech person in the company to kind of be the gatekeeper to that. Does that happen to you? Should that be the role? Is that the best model? Is that what we've got? How do you people right now deal with that? And just by the way, can you all just also, first time round, come in, just say which company you're from as well, just so we all get a picture of that. Thank you.
So Tim, SiteMate. So ethics, well, as a leader, people look up to the way you do things, and they will follow the way you do things. So I think anyone who's in any leadership position has to do things right, and right should be following whatever their moral compass, whatever their ethics are. Hopefully that right does align with what the company's right is, and so if there is alignment with your views, the company's views, everything sort of falls into place. Where there's really challenging situations is where that doesn't occur, and that's I have been in situations where I haven't quite believed in the direction of an organisation and then trying to make a stand, trying to figure out what's the right position to take. A leader in this role should be taking this position. I personally do not like that position. What am I going to do? Am I going to follow my conviction, or am I going to follow the company line? And I have walked that one very poorly at times.
I've got the microphone and I'm never giving it up. Hi, I'm Nicola and I work at Fastmail, and we look after a lot of people's personal information. And thanks to the wonders of GDPR and the AA bill and the privacy laws and the mandatory breach reporting and the failures at PageUp and Cambridge Analytica, all of the consumers are starting to be more aware of how their people's data is used. And I think as an industry, we are historically very good at following the shiny technology and making the ethics of what we're doing with that data someone else's problem. We are very good at collecting massive amounts of data. Big data is a whole thing. There's languages and software and servers and whole courses you can take in managing big data, and it's all about the fact that we collect a bucket load of data on customers around the world, and then we're very good at linking it together, and we use it for marketing and for making our services better, but people don't know where that data goes. Like, we don't know where that data goes. How do our customers have any hope? So yeah, I think it is absolutely our right and our responsibility to step up right now and start paying attention to this stuff. The law is always going to lag. The consumers are fighting for a voice, but particularly in Australia, we don't have a human rights charter, and our privacy laws are not quite keeping up with the pace of change in technology. Law is always going to struggle. Advocacy groups are out there and unions are out there, but they are, by virtue of their adversarial nature, not capable of driving heaps and heaps of change. So the only way it's actually going to work on behalf of our customers is if we take a stand. And you know what? It's actually really good for the bottom line. It is one of the ways in which Fastmail differentiates itself from many other large email providers, Google, by sitting there and saying, you can trust us with your personal data because you pay us for this service. So we do not have to generate revenue for you any other way.
Nicola, I've got a question here, and that is, you're talking about here people's private data, and that's one aspect of it, and you are a technical person. Why is it on your shoulders? Shouldn't this be the role of the CEO to look at it across the entire organisation? Why is it falling on you as technical person to care about this the most?
It's got to start somewhere, and I think as CTOs and technical leaders, we've got an insight that maybe other people at the executive level don't have on the sheer volume and depth of data that we're collecting. You know, if you think about what's your data expiry policy, how long are you hanging on to that data for even an ex-customer? Like, the CEO doesn't know that, but hopefully as a CTO, you've thought about this and put some policies in place, and if you haven't, please go away from here and do that. So, you know, yes, it would be very convenient to sit there and say it's someone else's problem. But I don't know, that's not in line with my moral code. I want to sit there and say I'm doing the best that I can for my entire organisation, and I firmly believe that one of those roles is to do the right thing with the data that I am charged to protect. And sometimes that means that you need to go and talk to the rest of the exec team or the other leaders in your company and make it part of their vision too, and hopefully make it part of the company's vision as a whole, because it works best if everybody in the company is aware of this stuff and is following those behaviours. So, you might have to do some influencing, because managing this data can, at first glance appear to be harmful to your bottom line. Oh, that means that we can't mine all that customer data forever and ever. We don't know why we might need it, but we might need it, so we don't want to delete it. Start off by deleting it. You can always, increase your attention at some other point in time. So yeah, I'd love to not think about it, but it keeps me up at night, and it keeps me up at night thinking about what my kids are going to have to contend with. And I want to build a better world, and I want to build the technology to build a better world. And I need to do that, I need to educate people like lawmakers as to why they say, I'm building an encryption breaking law. That's not feasible. And, so that's why it's my job as CTO to, get into this sort of stuff. I'm stopping now.
You said you were going to hold it forever.
I'm trying to be nice.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I'm Doug English from Culture Amp, and I certainly agree that a CTO has a responsibility to bring a different perspective to the debates or conversations about what should or shouldn't a company be doing. I don't think it should be necessarily a CTO's job to be the gatekeeper as such. I think a lot of thinking back on some of the more challenging ethical decisions we've had to make within Culture Amp, I think they're often decisions where internally we are quite divided as a group. So, for example, there was a company that wanted to become a Culture Amp customer in the US who were renowned for very sexist ads. And there was a fairly large group within Culture Amp that were basically saying we should not be supporting a company that's doing the sorts of things that this company is doing. The alternate way of looking at that same debate is if we're not giving a voice to employees within companies like that, then we can't reasonably expect those companies to change. So I think it's one of those ones where it's sometimes difficult to work out what the right answer is. And I think probably the thing that I think is really important for companies is to have a really clear set of values and to make sure that they're making decisions using those values and trying to do what what they think is going to result in the best outcomes. And of course that can be really hard when you've got like lots of different people that have different opinions. The way we normally do any sort of decisions, but particularly when it's ethical decision making within the company, is we often find it's much easier to work out, to agree with consensus who is the right person to make a decision than what the right decision is. And so we normally start there and then we haven't used humming. Maybe we should try something like that. But yeah, usually working out who is the right person to make the decision is the easier part. And then we expect that person to be listening to all of the different viewpoints and to be making a judgment. And then for everybody else to disagree and commit.
James Ross from Envato. Agree with Doug, not sure that CTO should be the gatekeeper, and some of these things do result in a lot of internal division. A practical example for us was GDPR and the management of consent. And I also agree the starting point is deciding who decides. So we had a lot of internal people who would have spoken on with this kind of passion about the topic. Other people more commercially motivated who look more to, what's common business practice more than maybe the ethical ideal. And the key thing was to get the decision about who decides made transparently. And the only person in our culture who can make that decision is our founder. And then as we navigated through that implementation of consent management under GDPR, we had a project manager who did a great job of facilitating the transparent gathering of the opinions, making documents about here's the decision we have to make, here's the views, the various views that people have, checking that people felt their views were represented properly, prior agreement on who would make the call, the call being made and then communicated and then tracking it all in a decision log. So at least it's been made transparently. At the end of the day though, people, if they see you making decisions as best you can in alignment with their values and they still don't like it, that's just the fact of the matter. You can't, and it is important to accept that people who work for your company will end up judging whether the company's one they want to work at based on the navigation of these sorts of things.
That's certainly what I was going to lead to in that, company ethics and values is a hygiene factor for people, and you can give them a big fat salary, and you can give them, ping pong machines and complimentary massages and all the perks in the world. But if in the end what the company is doing is not in line with their personal values, eventually they leave. So I think having a decision process that is public and being done in an ethical way, like the process itself is ethical, that helps produce an outcome where people feel that they can be bought in. Now, it may well be that the outcome is but at least they feel like they're being heard. So that's first step. But obviously, if the conclusion is something that they don't agree with and they don't agree with strongly, at our level anyway, we have the privilege to be paid well enough and to be working in a country and an industry and with a healthcare system that allows us to walk away. And that is, the ultimate way to vote with your feet. If you think a company is not doing well, you can starve them of your talent and walk away if you cannot, produce that change within your company that you're looking for. There are many within our teams who also have that luxury. But there are plenty, you think about your customer support people, they're usually very lowly paid on the totem pole, and maybe they don't have that luxury. So it is something that I think is worth surfacing, worth talking about, worth making explicit in your organisation. We see ethical issues popping up around the globe. You just need to open up your news feed or even trending topics on Twitter, and you can find lots of stuff that make you feel very unhappy. And it's all because people are making what I would term bad ethical decisions. So, I want everybody in this room to make good ethical decisions, or at least do things with intention. Don't, find yourself in a bad place because you didn't really think about it hard enough. You're all smart people. You can think about hard problems. There might not be a very one clear answer, but at least, if you've made a transparent decision and you've actually made a decision as opposed to accidentally finding that you've harboured information that you maybe shouldn't have, then you can do something about it.
Well, just before you speak, Ruti, let's just ask the audience, has anyone here willing to raise their hand to say, yes, I have left a job because I did not believe with the ethics of a particular company? All right, interesting topic for you guys to talk about afterwards. Yeah, go ahead.
So everyone all of these people who talk,
This is Kruti, she's from Sheba.
Yeah, hi, I'm from Sheba Rideshare.
Better than Uber.
So I come from a very smaller company, and when I've joined that about 6 months ago, and since then I have been the gatekeeper for a lot of ethical decisions that we have made. One of them is related to data and whom we are sharing, how much we are sharing, what level of data and information we are sharing of our users. Because in the end, I'm a believer that culture and ethics go hand in hand. So if you have a good culture in your company where they also, say for example, Sheba, they believe in, we all believe in women's safety. So if that comes in picture, we have to make sure that our data is not shared in a way that it is risking their safety, say for example. So initially I had been the gatekeeper, and now it has become a culture of my team where everyone at Sheba cares about how much information we are sharing it outside. So including our data analysts to our CEO, if we do any tie-ups with third-party company, we also ask them what sort of information they are sharing with third-party companies they have. So yeah, I think it's again comes back to how you influence. Initially, you might have to do a little bit of educational piece as well, but after that, you get into the culture. It gets into the culture.
So here's the thing. I mentioned that ethics in technology is like something I'm really passionate about. I'm sure you can tell it sets my hair pink. A lot of what we've been talking about so far is about internal culture. How do you produce an ethical internal culture within your company so that you behave well and your customers know you and love you because they trust you? What about external? Just today I was reading that India is in the process of passing a law that allows the government to access anonymised aggregated data about that they get from companies. So it's a little bit like the AA bill. Hi, I would like to access your data. However, they say, we promise to pay you for it, and it's been anonymised already. Now, we all know in this room that anonymising data is not sufficient. People can be re-identified, particularly when you get lots of data sets together. So imagine what happens when a country like India pays you, because they've said, yes, we promise to pay people if it's, to gather their data. They pay you to get your anonymous data set, and they pay you, and they pay you, and they pay you. And you're working in a country where one of your customers that you might choose to explicitly target is the government, because they've got lots of money to pay. So you generate a data set that you are specifically hoping the government will come along and ask for, because that's a financial model, a business model that allows you to be successful. And then you know that the government's taking your data and someone else's data and someone else's data, and thanks to the power of big data, they can, de-anonymise it and find out who everybody is and what they're doing and what they're getting up to. So this is why I'm like, ethics is not just something that we need to worry about internally. It's also, would you ever have the power? Do you think that you're going to be able to turn around and say, no, we never want to sell this data to the government? Like, it's tough to say we don't trust the government, but there we are. And then can you ever, sit there and say, now is the time to unionise, to sit there and say, as an industry, what do we promise ourselves and each other that we will not collectively do? Like, that to me is that's the next challenge of the next 10 years when we talk about ethics in technology. It's banding together and producing a common set of standards that will protect what we get up to, protect the people of the world.
Let's just do a quick poll of the room, see what we're dealing with. How many people have Google Analytics on their sites?
Come on, everybody should be having their hands up by now, I
So
reckon.
we're all part of the surveillance capitalism.
Yep.
So your company doesn't?
No, and
So-
my marketing people are really unhappy.
So I'm just going to be controversial and say the rest of us are here making a living reliant on Google. So it's actually a challenge for us to balance this, whereas your company has chosen a different path. So it's in alignment with your ethics and your commercial outlook are aligned. For everyone else, saying don't partner with Google when it's how we feed our children is more challenging. So how would you suggest that people who actually have a real, their intention, deal with that?
If you ever have to choose between being ethical and sinking the company, one would say that maybe your basis for building a company is not all that great. So I would sit there and say, you as a company need to choose how much that Google Analytics is worth. It's not going to sink your company to go to a different platform. You might be less successful. So how much of that decrease of insight into, going to a lower tier tool, how much is that worth it to you for your, analytics? We're using an open source thing. You can contribute back to it. So, and the more people who use the alternative, it makes it more powerful. This is why we have competition commission things, so that we don't have big dominant players in the marketplace, but it doesn't work against Google very well. So, there are decision points, and you can sit there and say, there was this article that I read of this guy, and he got his friend to set up a custom VPN, and he said, cut me off from Google. And he had to do it at a VPN level because he suddenly discovered he opened up his phone and like half of his apps suddenly stopped working, even though at no point had the app said, do you say that you are happy to share data with Google? But he discovered that, Apple Maps actually under the covers relies on Google. DuckDuckGo under the covers relies on some stuff from Google. Like everything relies on Google. It's very hard to cut it 100% out of your life. But the more friction we put in there, then you are sort of separating yourself one removed from Google. Now, I'm not saying that Google is totally evil, but you brought it up as a thing, and it speaks to, as a company, you can make these choices, and you can sit there and say which are the battles that we want to pick. And now we, Fastmail, we have sat there and said explicitly, you can trust us with our data. We don't share it with Google. Lots of people come to us because they are explicitly trying to avoid the monolith. Particularly since the monolith got rid of don't be evil.
I got a question here. So yes, we care about ethics, although yes, we're using Google Analytics, but has anyone operationalized that? Like, what is it in your companies around, this is a question from here, around process that drives people into making the right decisions? Or is it like we've had a few one-offs where it was brought up to the CEO's attention and we did the right thing, we decided who's going to decide, but is there a general purpose process that we've yet adopted, or has anyone adopted on the panel, for being ethically good in their company?
Maybe the angle. I put ethics in the same bucket as kind of all the grey decisions that companies need to make. And I think there are systems and processes in place with boards and executive teams and risk committees and kind of forums like that where these grey kind of decisions can be made, and it's not black and white. So they're the kind of processes we use. And I kind of I think that we started with representation that a CTO was the keeper of the data or the ethical conversation. I think that's a real anti-pattern. I think the issues like these are multidimensional, and the more diverse views you have on the technology, product, marketing, legal, I think that's going to make a better decision in the end. So think about what processes or rituals or groups you've got in the company that can make those kind of decisions, and that's how we approach it.
Any other questions from the floor on this topic? Over this side? Okay, so then let's move on to the next topic. Architecture. So this came up at the lean coffee on my table a lot, which was so many people who are CTOs have come up from an engineer to a dev lead to an architect to a CTO potentially, or we're on that path in this room, many of us. So really, how do you architect at scale? What does it mean to in fact architect? Like I can be an architect for my little team, and that means I might have some knowledge about which technologies to choose for what we're doing. But when you're talking about a bigger company and many teams, is there synergy that an architect can help with? Is that a fallacy? Should you ignore that? Or is that really important to think, where can we save, where can we optimize by doing architecture across the company? That's the topic. Go for it.
Everyone's looking at me. There are different models. Architecture is super important, no matter how you cut it. I think you have to deal with that somehow in your organisation. And then I think there's different models on how you do that. And there are there's pros and cons to different models. There's centralised, decentralised. There are everything in between. So maybe I can speak about how we do it. So we run a pretty decentralised technology organisation. So our approach to architecture is we don't have a ivory hour central architecture team really. We have a very small number of architects that are central, and the job is really to make sure that the decision-making processes we have around making architecture decisions exist and are healthy. So it's more about supporting the ecosystem through which we make decisions and making all the decisions themselves. And then I really try and put architecture decisions in teams or closest to where the problem is. So a lot of our architects are in teams or in our lines of businesses that are making technology decisions every day.
And Tom, that is intra-team. And is there any value in doing this cross-team, and how do you achieve that? And that's open to anyone.
The process we have, and I can speak in more detail if you like, but they kind of deal with the kind of scope of architecture decisions. So, teams are developers making decisions every day when they're pair programming, go for it. If you're making decisions that impact your team, document it, let people know, but go for it. If you're making decisions that affect another team, there's a higher level of process. If you're making decisions that affect the whole company, there's an even higher level of process. And it's a peer review type process. It's not a kind of go to the board for a decision type process. So it really encourages the inclusion of all the options and assessment of what are the trade-offs are. And input from all the stakeholders, and then finally a recording of that decision.
Goran here from Kogan.com. I've got just strong views on this just from experience I've had working with big companies, smaller companies, and in general. And I'll ask, how many people here have had experience or the working with cloud architects or from the cloud vendors and stuff that come to you? So a few, and you see they come up and they draw a lot of boxes and they show you this solution of how you're going to do big data, machine learning, AI is going to solve all your problems. There's 6 blockchain in there just to make sure it's all good and trustworthy. And there's a couple of boxes on screen and it's all good and easy. And a lot of these people had come from a technical place, but they haven't probably been technical for a while. And I think one of the big concerns I have with a lot of architecture roles is that they're too distant from the code, from the people actually writing the stuff to know what has to happen. I think it makes sense, as Tom said, at a higher level to support the processes and decision making. But when I've worked with different vendors or partners, and they've got an architect team that's come up and proposed some solution of how they're going to do some technical process to interchange some data or files. And I've looked at what they've done and I'm like, if they just picked like, okay, let's get some cool words. We want Kafka, we want encryption, we're going to have blockchain down there. And you're like, you see this over-engineered process because it's easy. The cost of a box is pretty cheap when you're drawing it, but it takes forever for them to then implement it because those boxes are really hard to actually build. So I think it's best left to your engineers. It allows engineers to make high-level decisions and think about the problem at a better space. It's fun stuff to do as an engineer. And then I think maybe when you do get to having a lot of engineers and a lot of services running, you do need a sort of an oversight level to help make sure everybody in the company is in the same page, but not necessarily the one that specifies this is going to be Kafka as opposed to, insert something here.
Ours at Nevada is very similar to what Tom was describing, smaller scale, about 150 engineers. And our metaphor for architecture is like a pull request, but at a high level of abstraction. So, and the architects are not there to make the decision, they're to make sure that the decisions are made well. So the architects have defined, they make sure that if something's happening that hasn't been surfaced, they'll get it surfaced, and they have a document template that people fill out to make sure if there's something that's architecturally significant, they've done enough thinking. That includes things like what's the commercial driver for what you're proposing, because we don't want people to, we have a term for it I probably shouldn't use up here, but we don't want to be doing tech for tech's sake. You want to be commercially driven. What are the quality attributes you're optimizing for? Is it performance or security or scalability? So just minimum due diligence on what you've thought about. And then there's a Slack channel where people put these documents, say, hey, we've got this proposal, this is what we think you're doing. There's no change approval board. There is just a social process where people review what they're doing and give them feedback. And the architects and I are there to make sure that that's a healthy process of feedback being given respectfully, treated with respect, and it's more a social norming process of being good citizens.
I think maybe one comment I make on Goran's point is it is a different skill, I think, that to make very cross-cutting, very wide-scoped architecture decisions than it is to make quite an isolated kind of software, picking a tool over another tool decision. So I kind of buy into the thing of having engineers make decisions, but also I think it's a different skill to look at really broad things, and the kind of people you want there need to have a high perspective, more connection to the overall goal of the business, understand the push and pull of the decisions from the rest of the teams and the broader organisation. And quite often people in a team writing software in a kind of bandit context don't have that broader view to really make a great decision. So maybe that's more of a operational warning if you're going for that approach.
So within CultureAmp, so I guess I am an example of a CTO that came up through tech and then into an architecture role, and then eventually did a sort of a sideward move into starting a company, and have ended up in a CTO role again now. We've got about 150 people in our product group, and I would say over the last probably 6 months or so that we've had a much stronger push to try and create more of a higher level architecture that can be clearly communicated. A lot of what we've been focusing on is trying to, it's not really about taking decisions away from individual teams, quite the opposite. We want them to be making a lot of the decisions, but we're trying to set up more of a higher level view, almost like a strategic roadmap for the teams to align against. And so it's more about trying to create alignment across teams than anything. And I guess a good example of that, like a bunch of us in the room, CultureAmp has gone deeply down the event sourcing CQRS sort of patterns. And for CultureAmp, because we collect a lot of data, and then ultimately collecting data is really only about 10% of what we do. Most of what we do is analysing it. The pattern of separating your reads from writes is a really powerful one for us in allowing us to be able to sort of reinterpret data that we potentially collected 5 years ago even. And so the idea of having projections of events from our source systems being able to be very easily consumed by new systems downstream means that we can open up lots of innovation where somebody has a great idea of how to analyze certain data from our onboard surveys with our performance reviews. They can run that, do a bunch of experiments without impacting anybody, and then if it doesn't come to anything of value, just dump it. So a lot of the focus is on how do we build an architecture that allows them to be able to do that by minimizing the impact they have on other teams. And then I think what we've found as we've tried to roll that out is the next challenge is it's great to have a high-level architecture, but it's the actual connection is the challenging part. Like how do engineers that are not necessarily have 10, 15 years of domain architecture experience, how do they take what you've got and actually do something meaningful with it? And so with that, we've been introducing what we've been calling the golden paths. So trying to kind of, with a bunch of different technologies that we use, combinations of reusable assets or libraries that they can pull in and make use of, and then examples so they can kind of clone the example the example repo and then leverage the assets. So we've tried to do a lot of that. That's really trying to make it as easy as possible for people to follow the architecture. We're still definitely on the journey though.
So what I'm hearing you say, because Simon wanted us to be contentious a little bit, is that your architects are your senior engineers who've got really good, and some people call them soft skills and I call them core skills. They're senior engineers who've obviously got, lots of domain experience, and they're really good at influencing. Is that what I'm hearing? I mean, lots of people have architects who are senior engineers who don't play well with others, so they've been isolated off into their little ivory tower. Yeah, you're all laughing, aren't you? Yeah, they've been isolated off where they can't do any damage, and hopefully they'll produce something useful, and if they do, then you'll pull it back in. But, we can't afford to fire them for various reasons, and they know too much, so we like having them around, but we actually don't want them interfering with anyone else. So that's one model of architect, and I'm hoping that you've done something with those people by now. But the more useful model is obviously someone who's senior, but someone who can talk to others and influence them and show them why this pattern or this design or this architecture, and be the glue between the teams. And we've given them a title so that they don't feel bad about doing, that sort of integration, emotional labour in a sense of bringing that architecture across multiple different teams. Would you say that's a legitimate way of describing a successful architect?
I think that, at least now an organisation the size of we are, having broad influencing and kind of communication skills for those architect roles is critical. I don't think you can do it without it, because it relies a lot. The way we work, it's decentralised. It relies a lot on being plugged into the network, the relationships you have with the rest of the architects. And in fact, we find we've had, people that have, for career progression, want to get to that role, and not successful at it because they really hate that part of the job. They just, suddenly they're not writing code every day. They're more in meetings and trying to coordinate decisions rather than write code. And they're kind of not good at it. They're frustrated and they want out. It's kind of, and we support them.
Tom, but if people are working in their teams, let's say you've got 30 teams, if they're working in their teams and they're all making their own decisions, they can move very quickly and they can innovate quickly. But then when the CEO gets the bill, which says, oh yeah, we've got these 40 technologies and they're all very expensive, and guess what? They all do exactly the same thing, but we're paying them again because everyone likes a different one, we've all got our own opinions, we're losing quote unquote synergy. Doug, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I'll tie the two comments or questions together a little. I'll try at least. I think architecture is a lot more than that. As in, I definitely think there's a part of architecture which is about helping teams make better decisions. But I think to your point, Simon, with whole heap of teams with autonomy, I think a lot of Culture Amp is very much like this. Like, we have very cross-functional teams. They're mission-driven. They're given a fair bit of autonomy to work on things, and if left to their own devices, that can be a whole heap of speedboats going in completely different directions and crashing into each other. So I think good architecture is about alignment across those teams. And I think the reality of it is there's not one right way to do good architecture across the teams. You're going to have a whole heap of different opinions, and ultimately the reality of it is if you pick one and align in that approach and get everybody aligned towards that approach, you're going to move as a collective a lot further than not picking one. And so I think a lot of it is actually about, in some ways, narrowing choice, and it's a delicate balance because it is about narrowing, it's not about completely taking autonomy away. But I think by having the right balance of a high enough level of structure for people to align to, that's well considered and is designed to try and set the company up for where it needs to go over the next, say, 5 years, whilst leaving the teams to be flexible and dynamic and allowing them to be able to react the way they need to for the way that competitors respond in the market or to pounce on a new opportunity that comes up. I think that's good architecture is something that enables teams to go faster without crashing into each other. That's my view. And I think if you do that well, it can also drive down some of those costs.
So I want to second what Doug said around that aligned autonomy, which is something that Tom used to speak about a lot. It's essentially, it's not reducing the autonomy, it's just narrowing the boundaries of it. And whether it's about reusing some capabilities and making them visible. But I want to address something that Nicola said before around the strong influencer as the successful architect. And there's a very strong, very important quality that's essential, and that is being able to reason about bigger systems. And the best architects are able to do that across much bigger domains. And so one of the challenges is that when you have teams doing architecture only within the teams, and they're not looking at the bigger picture, you end up very quickly with things like a distributed monolith. So having that overview and the people who are able to hold those and reason about big systems in their head are really rare. And then you combine that with the people who also have those really strong influencing skills, and that's even rarer. And so
Tal, what do you think about this idea of a kind of like an architecture vision or architecture plan, like or a target architecture? Has your company got something like that?
We finally have a nascent version of it. We've got Karthik here who was instrumental in helping put this together. And the way I see it is if those multiple speedboats, just getting them going in the one direction. And for us especially, like we have a very big load of legacy and tech debt. It means that our product teams, as well as building product, they have to build it in a way that helps us get us out of this situation. So unless everyone is pulling in the right direction, we'll never get to where we need to. So.
Any questions from the floor? All right, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I think we'll call it there. Thank you to the whole panel. Cheers, that was good.